Hello, you're watching Global Insight with me, Young. Here from Arirang News Centre in Seoul, we connect with experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. Over the weekend, US media finally named Democratic Party candidate Joe Biden as the projected winner of the 2020 presidential election, bringing an end to 4 years of Donald Trump's term in the White House. With Kamala Harris as vice president, the first woman and person of color to fill the post, Biden said he'd work for all Americans, bringing an end to poisonous politics and raucous rhetoric that fueled division in the country. But incumbent President Donald Trump has still not conceded to the outcome, as candidates have traditionally done. He's continued to claim the election has been stolen from him, and it appears that he may continue to raise legal disputes to the outcome during his last 8 weeks in the White House. To get a glimpse of what the transition period might look like, we connect with Paul Smith, Professor at Georgetown Law School and Vice President for Litigation at the Campaign Legal Center. It's very good to see you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
We also connect with David Weiler, data analyst and political columnist at The Washington Post. It's lovely to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, now let's start with you, Dr. Smith. So we say it was a very unprecedented election in many ways. It was held amid a pandemic. We saw a particularly acrimonious battle between the presidential candidates, and there was, of course, the controversy over the voting and ballot counting process. Yet Americans in 2020, they still recorded the highest turnout in 120 years. Polling stations were rather smoothly operated and the votes were counted efficiently despite the constant interruptions. And many did see this election as a test of American democracy. So I want to know what this election was like for you as an election law expert, and are you happy with how it turned out despite the challenges?
Well, as you say, the election went quite smoothly. Despite the pandemic and all of the fighting we had beforehand about exactly what the rules would be for voting in a time of pandemic, by the time we got to Election Day, 100 million people had already voted, either by coming in early to vote in person or by mailing in a ballot. And so there was a much smaller crush of people that had to vote in person on Election Day. And it turned out that the polling stations worked well. Everybody who wanted to vote was able to do that. And we ended up with by far the highest turnout we've had in more than a century in terms of the percentage, by far the highest turnout ever in terms of absolute numbers. Americans really wanted to vote in this election. They were able to vote in this election. It was obviously, as you say, an election that was, both sides were very, very excited and worried about at the same time. And so it's good that a lot of the stuff we worried about beforehand didn't happen, such as, for example, worry that there might have been foreign interference with the voting systems. None of that really turned out to be a problem.
Now, Mr. Byler, now that Joe Biden has won, what do you think his next steps will be? I mean, what is his transition team prioritizing?
Right. So we've actually already seen him telegraph some of his next steps in his acceptance speech on last night, actually. Biden said that he would be naming a team on Monday morning of COVID experts who would be able to help him sort of turn his platform on coronavirus into sort of a more substantive policy plan that could be implemented throughout the federal government. So that's clearly one of his first priorities. He believes that part of his mandate is to sort of solve that crisis and get back on track there. What we're going to see in the coming sort of weeks and couple of months is a cabinet forming. And what you're probably going to see is a number of people who are seen as center left or moderate or not on the far left sort of wing of the party be mentioned as possible picks for his cabinets to head various cabinet to head various departments in the federal government, because those people do have to get Senate clearance, and there's a whole process around that. So you're going to see the government sort of form, but you can see that the coronavirus is a big priority for it.
So really, President-elect Joe Biden has started with this transition process, but Mr. Donald Trump, he's still insisting that the election was fraudulent, and he's made it quite clear that he's not going to make the transition easy for Mr. Biden. So, Mr. Biden, what do you think Trump's next steps will be? I mean, should we be on guard for him potentially stirring even more anger among his supporters and causing some damage over the next 8 weeks?
Right. So Trump has pretty clearly telegraphed that he, will not accept the result if he believes it to be unfair. So far, he has not called to concede for Biden. He wants to take various forms of legal action to reverse the apparent outcome. I personally doubt that those actions and those routes will be successful. But I think that essentially he'll probably stir more dissent and more dissension because it would be very Trumpian for him to attempt to keep his base sort of in the fold and loyal to him and try to minimize the perception of a loss because these are people that he's going to want to appeal to in the future as a political base, a customer base, some sort of base for him later on in the future. So, maybe the concession call happens later, but you probably see a lot more of him sort of casting doubt on the outcome than you would from really any losing candidate in living memory.
So we can expect those tweets to keep coming. Well, Dr. Smith, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the president and his supporters really undermining this electoral process and refusing to accept Joe Biden's projected win. Do the claims of Mr. Trump and his supporters have any legal merit?
Well, no, they don't have any merit. The president's already had 5 days to bring any kind of claim forward of significant fraud in the election, but there is no such evidence. There is no such claim. The lawsuits that he has been filing are all minor little details of how the votes should be counted, the systems being used in one state or another. Almost all of them had been dismissed immediately as lacking any merit. But even if they did have merit, they don't have anything like fraud that they're showing. His claim that if he loses, it has to be by fraud is entirely made up. Unfortunately, he convinced many of his followers, even before the election, that the only way he could lose would be if it was stolen from him. And he's going to continue to say that now for the foreseeable future. And it's really, has no legal consequences. We don't need a concession from the president for him to be elected, thrown out of office. The election does that. But what it will do is it will leave a very significant percentage of the American people questioning the legitimacy of President-elect Biden's election and keep the American people divided. Make it impossible for Biden to do what he really wants to do, which is try to bring the country together, to work together to solve the problems that we have here. And I think it's most unfortunate that because of Mr. Trump's personal inability to accept defeat, he's going to take much of the country, a third or so of the country, and leave them thinking that the election was stolen from him. And keep saying that, I think, not just for the next 2 months, but for the rest of his life. That seems to be his way of operating. It's very, very unfortunate.
And Dr. Smith, President Trump has repeatedly said that he wants to take this to the US Supreme Court. How far do you think this kind of attempt will go, really?
You can't just take the election to the Supreme Court. You have to have a legal claim that you start in a lower court that's sufficiently significant that it warrants the attention of the United States Supreme Court. And the things he has filed so far are far from that. They are simply not things that are going to go up to the Supreme Court. And they said in their statement yesterday after Mr. Biden was declared the president by the various media outlets, on Monday morning we'll be in court proving that this election is not been correctly called, that I'm the correct winner, but they don't have anything to bring to court. And so I think it's a fantasy of Mr. Trump that because he's appointed 3 of the justices and it's a very conservative court, that somehow they're going to be his ace in the hole, his way of winning even when he's lost, and that he's going to be able to get them to declare him the winner. But that's not how a legal system works. That's not how judges behave. And to make a lawsuit of any significance, you have to have facts and you have to have the law on your side. And he has neither one. So, no, I don't think this election will get anywhere near the Supreme Court in a significant way. There may be efforts to bring smaller cases up there, but we're not going to see a repeat of what happened 20 years ago when President Bush was ultimately made the president because of a decision by the Supreme Court. That's not how we do it here, at least not when the election really isn't close. Biden is going to win by quite a bit when all is said and done.
Now, Mr. Byler, when Donald Trump does leave the White House in 8 weeks, where do you think he'll go, and where would that leave the Republican Party?
That's a great question. I think he'll probably head to Mar-a-Lago, his sort of Florida home and residence. Where he leaves the Republican Party is a great question. So one question that's going to be on the mind of many people is whether Trump sets up another run for 2024, or whether he just telegraphs a run for 2024, kind of hints at it to keep attention on him. That's one question that's on various people's mind. You know, in 2016, when many believed that Trump was going to lose the election, there was a lot of speculation that he would sort of start a kind of news venture of his own. So that's going to be something that I think people are going to revive talks about. And I think the place that it leaves the Republican Party is a complicated one, because down ballot, outside of the presidency, Republicans did fairly well in this election. In the House, they gained seats, even though Democrats are set to keep the majority there. In the Senate, dependent on some races in Georgia, Republicans may again retain the majority. So I think the Republican Party as a whole has to decide where it's going to go. But my sense is that the leaders in the Republican Party are not going to feel as in the wilderness as they felt in, say, 2012 following Barack Obama's reelection. I think they're going to say, okay, we need to kick the tires in a little bit, but our formula mostly worked on a number of levels. And so it's an interesting position that I think they're going to be in.
And Mr. Byler, with Joe Biden's win, how high are the stakes in the Senate races right now? I mean, if the Republicans manage to hang on to their majority, then what challenges will the new president be facing?
Yeah, if the Republicans hang on to the majority, it's going to be very difficult for Biden to govern. If Mitch McConnell is once again the Senate leader of the Republican majority there, he's going to have a lot of sort of agenda setting power over what happens in the upper chamber. Generally in U.S. politics, to get most very substantive legislative actions done, you need something from both houses, and McConnell's going to want to block him on many fronts. It's possible that Biden will at times get the support of some of the more moderate members of the Republicans. The Republicans may end up with a very thin edge where Biden could lure over someone like Susan Collins from Maine, or someone like Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, and kind of get the votes that he needs to get to 50 or 51. That's possible. But again, if that happens, Biden's going to have to put together sort of priorities and legislation that passes muster with everyone from the far left flank of his party to moderate Republicans. So I would say that the closely divided Senate, however it shakes out, is going to be a challenge for the Biden administration.
So it looks like who he appoints as his cabinet members will really be important in doing this. And well, now, Dr. Smith, now with the race being as close as it was, it seems that America is it's very much divided as a nation. What do you hope to see over the next 4 years in bridging that divide and really restoring the notion of democracy in American politics?
Well, you know, one of the things I would say in response to that is that we clearly have a continued commitment to democracy. The American people made clear they wanted to have their voice heard. And so they showed up in vast numbers to vote. 150 million or so showed up to vote. But what I would hope to see for the next 4 years is a lowering of the tensions, an ability for people to talk across the aisle, some cooperation. And it may be that Joe Biden is the perfect person to come in at this moment. He's a person who can work with Republicans. He has appeal to working class white voters that most Democratic leaders don't have. And he talks constantly about how we're all one country. We need to work together to solve things like the COVID problem and other problems. And so, you know, maybe it won't work, but I would sure like to see him succeed in his agenda of being president for all Americans, which you saw him say quite a bit about last night in his acceptance speech. That was really his main theme, which is we've got to stop this fighting.
And well, Mr. Byler, now before we go, it was quite reassuring and a rather emotional moment when the president-elect announced that it was a season of healing for America. What do you hope to see or never again see as a member of the media as your society leaves behind the last 4 years?
Honestly, after the last 4 years, I don't know if there's anything that I can say that I'm certainly leaving behind or looking forward at. It seems like anything is possible in U.S. politics right now. I think that I'm looking forward to having a little bit of slower news cycle, a little bit less volume of things to cover, maybe potentially just on a very selfish level, less busy days where a tweet doesn't just start an insane news cycle. But, I think the country remains deeply divided. I, like the professor, would love to see more unity in the country. I think there's a lot of deep divisions, though, and I think that the next 4 years is going to have its own set of bumps and bruises, even if it looks pretty different than what we've seen in the last 4.
Well, we here won't be missing the large volume of tweets either. But, well, this is where we have to wrap up the discussion today. That was Paul Smith, Professor at Georgetown Law School and Vice President for Litigation at the Campaign Legal Center, and David Byler, Data Analyst and Political Columnist at The Washington Post. Thank you both, gentlemen, so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you for watching and for starting your week with us. We hope you have a lovely day or evening wherever you are in the world. Goodbye.